Hey everybody, in this video I just wanted to take a quick second to talk about Create React App and what it is. So React and Create React App are not the same thing. React is the framework that we're going to be using to build our front-end applications, but it takes a little bit of setup and configuration in order to get it off of the ground. That's where Create React App comes in. So Create React App is just a template for starting your React project. It comes with some technologies that have their configuration files already set up for us right out of the box so that we don't have to spend any time doing that and we can just start writing our React code. Okay, but in case you're curious, I'll talk about a few of those technologies they include for us. And this is not an all-encompassing list. You can definitely dive down deeper into the rabbit hole if you please. But one of the biggest things we get from Create React App is Webpack. Webpack is a technology that's primarily used for helping us during the build process. So what it can do is it can take a look at the files that we're writing, see what other files they need access to. Say, for example, you have an HTML file that needs access to a CSS file. Webpack will basically create a map of all the dependencies that our application needs to have, okay? And then when we are building the production version of our application, Webpack is responsible for creating that one single JavaScript file, okay? And in addition to that, it also gives us access to Webpack Dev Server, which is basically how we launch our application in our browser when we're developing, kind of like Live Server if you've ever used that. The other big technology that it comes with is Babel. So Babel is a transpiler, or in other words, it transforms our code into other code, right? So as we're writing our modern JavaScript, that JavaScript may not be able to be read by every single browser, especially older ones like older versions of Internet Explorer. Babel is primarily responsible for taking our up-to-date ES6 syntax and making sure that all other browsers can read it. Okay, it also has some nice presets for React that can take the React code that we're writing and transpile it or transform it into something that all browsers can read. Okay, so these are the two big setup and configuration ones right here. All right. We also get ESLint out of the box. That would give us linting errors. So when you get some red squiggly lines or some yellow squiggly lines, kind of like in Microsoft Word, just to highlight your errors. That's what ESLint is doing for us. And then they also give us Jest, which is a JavaScript testing library. Okay, this allows us to write unit tests and verify that our code is working the way that we expect it to work. Okay, are any of these incredibly crucial for learning the fundamentals of React? I would say no. If your goal is to learn React, I'd say focus on learning React right now. And then once you're feeling comfortable with that, if you want to dive down a little bit deeper into the build process or the transpiling process or any of these other technologies, feel free to do that. But it's not going to be an absolute showstopper for you writing React code, right? Because Create React App has this setup done for us, so we can just get started. Alright guys, so with that high level overview out of the way, what I want to do now is just show you how to get set up with Create React App, and then what I'll go ahead and do is act as your tour guide and show you around, show you what we have available inside of the Create React App template. Okay, so probably not as fun as a tour at Disneyland or something like that, but hey, whatever. Okay, so what we have here is a VS Code window, all right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my terminal, okay, and then what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to navigate to the desktop, okay, so I'm going to type ls to see where I can go, and then I believe that desktop is an option, so I'll type cd desktop. Okay, and then what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to type the command npx space create react app, and then I'm going to write the name of whatever I want my application to be. I think I'm just going to call this CRA-tour, okay? And then I'll just go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so the first thing you may be wondering is why did we write npx instead of npm? Well, there's a difference between these two things. NPM is a package manager, right? It's in the name, Node Package Manager, NPM. NPX is a package runner, right? So I guess the X doesn't correspond with an R there, but basically what you need to know about it is that in addition to being able to install the dependencies that it needs, it can also execute these packages so that by the time that it's finished, we have all of the packages that we need and all of the configuration and setup files created as well. So we can just start writing our React code. Okay, so there's the big difference there. Instead of just installing a package, it can also execute packages for us. Okay, and now I can see that the Create React App template has finished installing. It says happy hacking. Okay, and what it does is it gives you a couple of commands that you can run to start off with. They're telling me I can run yarn start. If you don't have yarn installed on your computer, this would most likely say npm start. Okay, and we'll see where those commands are coming from in a second. Okay, so we can see that in the process of running that npx command, it created us a folder called CRA tour, right? It'll basically just make you a project with whatever name you give it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open that project in VS Code right here, and then I'm just going to open the File Explorer. Okay, starting down from the top, we have node modules. This is where all of our dependencies are coming from. So React, Webpack, Babel, Jest, all these things, they're just pre-written pieces of code that we can use in our project. And this is where they're coming from. And I'm sure you know this, but in case you don't, we typically don't go into the node modules folder and change stuff around very often, if ever. Okay, so we'll leave that guy alone. The next thing we see is this public folder right here. And we see we have an icon. There's a little React icon. We have an index.html page, a couple of logos right here. No big deal with that. Then we see this manifest JSON file. Okay, so this manifest JSON file is important for mobile users, and basically what it does is it just uses the data that you write in this file to help the mobile user add your web page to their home screen if that's what they're trying to do. Okay, so that's what that is. And then we also see this robots.txt file right here. A robots.txt file is basically for like web crawlers and web spiders that are scraping the web for data. And this file is basically here to tell it what files we want to ignore. Okay, they don't give us anything by default, but if that is a rabbit hole that you are diving down, this is kind of where you would start. Okay, and then moving on to the source folder. Okay, I'll start with the setup.tests file right here. This is basically a setup file for Jest, right? So if you wanted to do some unit testing, you would need this setup file right here. Okay, and then we see we have an app.test.js, and this is basically where we would write our unit tests. Okay, moving on from there, we have report web vitals. This is a file that allows us to track the performance of our application. Okay. Not terribly important for when we are learning React. Okay, so we can kind of ignore that. We see we have a logo, right? No big deal. And then after that, we see we have 2 JavaScript files and 2 CSS files. Okay, obviously we know what CSS is at this point. So let's take a look at these JavaScript files right here. We have index.js and then we have app.js. Okay, so in these 2 files, we see our first glimpse of React code, okay? And I'm going to explain what's going on in these files in a second, but what I want to do is kind of pump the brakes and pop open the console here and run the command that they gave us, okay? So they told me I could do yarn start, and I believe if you don't have yarn on your computer, they would probably tell you to run npm start. And And as we've seen before, our scripts are just coming from inside of our package JSON. Create React App was nice enough to give us some scripts that we could just use to launch our application. Okay. So once the server is up and running, we can see that we have a web page right here. We see we have a logo. It says edit source and app to save and reload, learn React. Okay. So your first instinct may be to take a look at this HTML page right here. And if we scroll through here, we see a bunch of comments and stuff, but we don't actually see any logos on the screen, and we don't see anything that says learn React like we're seeing on our web page. All we really see inside of this page is a div with an ID of root. Okay. So if you go ahead and take a look at your index.js file, okay, you see we have some import statements at the top. They're importing React, React DOM, they're bringing in their index.css file, they bring in this app.js file, and then they bring in report web vitals. Okay, and then after that we see React DOM.render, right? And what we see inside of that is something that looks like HTML tags, except they have capital letters. These are our components. This is the JSX that we're writing, okay? And if you remember from my last video, JSX is just the syntax that you write in React, which will then be converted into HTML later. Okay, so this first part, React.strict mode, that basically just tells your application to give you warnings if there are any errors. If you take that away, then you would lose those warnings. Okay, so for the sake of demonstration, you don't have to get rid of this because obviously you would probably want those warnings. But what I'm going to do is just get rid of those so we can just focus on this app right here. Okay, so what we're saying is React DOM.render app. And then what they say is document.getElementById root, which we saw earlier. If we take a look at that index.html file, here's that div with an ID of root. Okay, so in my last video, I was explaining to you how React allows us to write single page applications, which means that we just have one single HTML file, which is this right here. And then what we're doing is we're just taking the contents of this app file right here and we're putting it into that div with an ID of root, right? Here's our single page. And then React is basically in charge for putting elements into here and taking them out as we tell it to. Okay, so that's the index.html page. They're basically calling a component and putting it into our HTML file. Right, but we still haven't seen where that logo is coming from or where that text that said learn React is coming from. Okay, so if we find our way to the app.js file right here, we can see that finally we see some content on the page. We see some JSX right here, right, which will later be converted into HTML. And then we finally see our content. We see save to reload, we see learn React, we see we have an image right here. This is where our content is coming from. So in a nutshell, you have an index.html, which the index.js file is putting stuff into, and then what are we putting into it? We're saying, hey, put this app component into the index.html file. Okay, and I know we haven't talked about components or what this syntax is, but this is just meant to be a quick high-level overview, just so that you're not looking at all this stuff, wondering what it is. Okay, so that was your tour of Create React App, and as an added bonus, what I'll go ahead and do is just show you the general cleanup I do, because obviously we don't need everything in here in order to learn React, and I don't know about you, but for me personally, it's easier to focus in on what I have to do if I'm not looking at a bunch of other things, getting distracted. Okay, so typically what I'll do is I'll get rid of the setup tests.js, because if I'm just learning React, I'm probably not writing unit tests unless that's what I was learning, in which case I would keep it. I'm going to get rid of the report web vitals, okay, and then I'm probably not going to use the logo.svg. All right, and then from within the public folder, I'm probably not going to be using this logo. I'm not going to use this manifest for now, and I'm not going to use this robots file, and I'm not going to use this favicon either. Okay, so if you npm start your app, you'll come over here and you'll see that we have an error on the screen right here. It's saying source logo.svg, no such file or directory. Okay, so it's saying this because somewhere in our application we're trying to use logo.svg, but we deleted it, so it doesn't know where to find it. All right, and it looks like we are using that inside of our app.js file, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. And then while we're at it, let's just go ahead and get rid of all of this React JSX, and I'll just say starter template. All right, and then if we save our application, we see we have another error again, right? And the helpful error warnings is trying to hint us in the direction that we need to be. It's saying, hey, we didn't see a report web files JS, okay? And that's happening because we have an index.js file right here. And what we're trying to do is import web vitals, but we deleted it. So we're gonna have to get rid of this as well. Okay, and then if we save that and refresh the page, we have our starter template. Okay, so kind of just fleshed it out. All we have is a public folder with an index.html, a couple of JavaScript files that are necessary for rendering our application, and then just some CSS files. Okay, so if you don't want to do this startup every single time, you could probably create a GitHub repository. But for the most part, when I'm doing my coding tutorials, I kind of just flesh everything out anyways. So it's up to you on whether or not you want to do that or not. It's all personal preference. Okay, but that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, guys.